Good morning, everyone, and welcome to those attending or watching online or after the event. This is the December 2021 meeting of the Perth and Kinross Council Audit Committee. You're very welcome. Can I start then with any apologies and substitutes? Kirsten, do you have anyone?
Yes, Convener, we have apologies from Councillor Donaldson with Councillor Lane substituting, and we also have apologies from Councillor Harry Coates.
Okay, thank you. Now, can I ask you just to take a roll call?
Yes, good morning, members. When I call out your name, if you could please confirm that you're present. Councillor Drysdale, we've heard from yourself. Councillor Liz Barrett.
Present.
Councillor Illingworth.
I see Councillor Illingworth just arriving now by the looks.
I think so. Councillor Illingworth, are you present? Oh, I can see. I'm sorry, Councillor Illingworth, you're muted. I'll come back. Councillor Lane.
Present.
Councillor McCall.
Present.
And Councillor McDade.
Councillor McDade is here, was here, but is
Yeah.
having connection issues.
Yeah, it looks like he's still in the meeting.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear my name being said there. There's a lot of breaking up going on.
And just Councillor Illingworth, I could just get you to confirm that you're present.
I'm present. Yep,
Oh,
I'm here now.
Thank you. All members are present, Convener.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. Okay, moving on to item 2 on the agenda then, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? If so, please put DI in the chat. I would like to place on record that under section 5.4C of the revised Code of Conduct for Councillors issued yesterday by Scottish Government and effective immediately, I do not believe that I require to declare a non-financial interest in terms of item 5.252A in relation to the audit of contracting in all 3 services and the Health and Social Care Partnership, notwithstanding my role as Vice Chair of the Integration Joint Board. No other declarations of interest? Okay. Can we move on then to item 3, which is the minute of the meeting of the Audit Committee of the 20th of September. Are there any issues with accuracy on that draft minute? If not, can I take that as agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed, Convener.
Thank you very much. Moving swiftly on to item 4 on the agenda, which is the internal audit follow-up, our routine review at every meeting. And can I ask Jackie to speak to that report, please?
Thank you, Convener. Again, this will be quite a brief summary, as there are no actions outstanding from the period that I've been following up for this committee. There are 2 reports which are being followed up in the new year, as the committee is aware. But other than that, there were 10 actions, 3 of which were due for completion in July to September, and evidence was provided to internal audit for the completion of all 3 actions. So there's no appendix this time. I actually don't remember when that last happened, but it's good to note.
Thank you. And I have a question from Councillor Lane.
Thanks. This is my first visit to Audit Committee in 9 years, so expect some daft laddie questions. So it's interesting to me that there's 35 actions arising from internal audit, and two of the reports have been put back due to the impact of COVID-19, which are 25 actions. And so with not having an appendix, I don't see when these actions, and neither will members of the public know when these actions were going to be completed. Could I ask why these 25 actions were put back because of COVID-19?
Of course, thank you for the question, Councillor. These two reports pertained to the Council's management and handling of cash, and also to the cash collection and reimbursement of income in connection with Live Active Leisure through the campuses. Due to the fact that our arrangements changed significantly with regard to cash collection throughout COVID, it was not really appropriate to follow up all of the actions within the cash reports because we weren't collecting cash, and other decisions needed to be made around that. It was reported to a previous audit committee that the reports would be reviewed and followed up in full once normal business had been commenced. Also, looking at the campuses, the Live Active sites within campuses were not operational for a significant period of time, and again, we needed to make sure that the revised controls that were put in place were effective, rather than just controls that looked good on paper. So hence the reason for the delay. We'll be looking at both those reports in their entirety in the beginning of the new year.
Can I follow up, please, Convener?
Of course, of course.
So two points to that. So we may be able to follow up because we may be back in lockdown. So we can't say that we definitely will because there may be no change in the cash hands-on situation. We may be back to that. Could we not have had a report of coming forward of what the new, if there was an action needed, obviously there would be, there must have been a reason for that action, and that could that have not been worked up, and maybe it has, without actually collecting cash and wait until we were back to that before the action was put in place? Or could we not have then had put all the actions in place and checked how the new things put in place were actually functioning after it was open, rather than delaying the whole paper?
Thank you for the questions. In some respects, what you've said has happened. We haven't sort of set the reports to one side and not looked at them at all. We have engaged with particularly ECS over these actions, and a lot of work has been done. But really, I wouldn't be looking at making a comment on the effectiveness of the control environment and accepting that actions are being completed until after we've had time to roll these things out. I do take on board the comment that things may be different. Again, we may not be in a position to completely close these actions, but it was agreed at a previous audit committee that we would bring a report up to following the work done at the start of the year, that we would, so irrespective of the state of play, we will be bringing a report back to the next meeting of audit committee.
Okay, is that happy with that, Councillor Lane?
Yep.
Okay. Are there any further questions or comments? And if not, can we agree to note the report?
Noted.
Noted.
Thank you. Moving on then to item 5 on the agenda, which is the internal audit update. And again, Jackie, if I can ask you to speak to this report, please.
Thank you, Convener. The report and appendix provides a snapshot of internal audit activity, and along with when I anticipate that reports will be available for consideration by this committee. As is stated, our new internal audit trainee has taken up post and is fitting in well and is learning the ropes and being productive. There are 2 reports on this agenda today, and I'd like to also note that all the work in connection with the bus service operators grant has now been concluded for the year as well. I'm happy to take any comments or questions on this.
Thank you. This mute button again. There we go. Yeah. So, are there any questions? First of all, please. And there don't appear to be. Are there any comments on the paper?
Yeah, just personally, I'm very comfortable with the work that internal audit do, and as usual, this is an excellent report from internal audit, so that's my only comment.
Oh, here we're getting some stuff coming through now. First of all, we have a question from Councillor McDade.
Thanks, convener. Apologies, there might be a delay. I'm not quite sure here. At 1.4 talks about recruitment activity to take on a professional trainee, which I think we've done in previous recent years. Could the head of the Chief Internal Auditor just outline what the current size of her team is as a result of that?
Thank you, Councillor. In addition to myself, we have 2 full-time people currently employed, and we're looking to expand further.
Is that okay, Xander?
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. And we have a comment from Councillor McCall.
Yeah, thank you, convener. Again, not too dissimilar to Councillor Illingworth, but knowing the issues that we've had with Horsecross and the situation all being exacerbated with the pandemic, etc., I just wanted to put on record my thanks and my appreciation to the work done by the team. Obviously, these things are difficult to monitor and have been difficult to monitor, but it looks like everything is moving in the right direction. I just wanted to specifically highlight that and say thank you very much for the work that's been done.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further comments, it's recommended that the committee notes the progress with the internal audit activity during 2021. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, moving on then to the next item on the agenda, which is down as item as 5.1, etc., but it's really I suppose it is 5.1, is it? Yeah, it is. Let's stick to these reference numbers. So we have a report on audit activity in 1912 on Alios and Horsecross in particular. And if I can ask Jackie Clark to speak to that report, and I see we have Fiona Robertson present today as well, who I'm sure will be able to answer some questions if as required after Jackie's presentation as necessary. Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you, convener. Elected members will be aware of the historic report of Audit Glasgow from 2019, which raised some concerns and also highlighted other areas that they believe would benefit from review. The focus of the report in front of you was to ascertain how well we as a council were aware of and were supporting when necessary Horsecross to address the issues that were raised. It's not an audit of Horsecross, nor does it seek to recreate the audit activity that was undertaken by Glasgow Audit. This is very much a follow-up of the report that Glasgow published. In section 4, you'll see that there are 3 objectives for this audit. The first concerns the completion of those actions identified as high risk by the audit, of which there were 5. The second for those of medium risk, of which there were 7. And the third concerning those areas which were highlighted for review but were not within the scope of the Audit Glasgow work. The individual objectives are assessed by internal audit as having reasonable and substantial assurance over the arrangements that the council has in place. There are 4 actions for council officers which are detailed within the Management Action Plan at section 9. Since the report was concluded, I can report that evidence for the first action point, which is of high importance, has been provided to me, so I can confirm that that action has been completed. As Councillor Drysdale said, Fiona Robertson is here, and also in attendance at this meeting is Willie Anderson, who is the Head of Finance and Administration at Horsecross. So I'm sure that any of us will answer any questions or happy to hear any comments that you have on this report.
Thank you, Jackie, and welcome, Willie. I wasn't quite sure who you were, but hello, welcome. Okay, so I imagine there might be 1 or 2 questions on this this report, recognising that this is framed as Jackie has outlined. And I have a question from Councillor Lane.
Thanks. I've got several questions, but as is the norm in committee, I will just ask 1 question and then let others come in. I'm quite happy to come later on.
Thank you.
The first question I'd ask is, it was sent out yesterday at 10 to 5, the link to the Glasgow report. Well, I was just wondering, it's okay, you know, did my homework and read that prior, but I was wondering if there was a need to send it out for elected members to be aware of it. Why was it sent out at such a late time on the day before the committee? Other officers will know that I've complained often about getting information with no time to review it before going to committee or even into a meeting with officers. So I was just wondering why it was at 10 to 4 last night it was sent out. 10 to 5 maybe, I think.
Jackie?
Thank you for that question. The link to the report was also within the report that is tabled to you today. It was really as a reminder that was there, but within the report that my report was a link to the Audit Glasgow report. I just felt it might have been helpful, and as I've been on leave and I was only back, I've only come back this week. It was something that I just thought yesterday would have been helpful for elected members. That was all. But the link was provided as part of my original report.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. Thank you. And now we have a question from Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Convener. I do appreciate the difficulties faced by Horsecross and the team during COVID in tackling the very serious findings of the Glasgow audit. And thank you, Jackie, for sending on the link to it, because I hadn't been familiar with it before. Looking at the table in 4.1, I'd ask, is there confidence that the control objective assessment will increase to substantial rather than reasonable as a result of the actions that are set out here?
That would always be the aim for once the actions have been completed, and assuming that no other changes were made to the control environment, that one would be in a position to place substantial assurance.
Thank you. I do have concerns around this area. I know a lot of progress has been made, and we do appreciate that. But just so things don't slip again. Thank you.
No, thank you, and your point is well made, Councillor Barrett. Thank you for that. Councillor McDade.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Hopefully you can hear me. I have a number of questions, but I'll ask one and let Councillor Lane come back in with his other ones. First of all, on 5.7, it talks about the staff structure and 3 freelance staff who are reporting directly into the Chief Executive, which I think is quite unusual. How many direct reports does the Chief Executive have, i.e. what does this represent in terms of his direct reports number, and just for the public potentially watching this, can you explain what IR35 is? I understand what it is, but I think it would be helpful for people reading the report to understand that it's about freelancers who would normally be directly employed because of they count as workers under the Supreme Court ruling.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. Jackie, are you able to answer that, or Mr. Anderson, perhaps?
I think it would be best to direct the question to Mr. Anderson.
You're on mute, Willie.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I can say, having only been in contact with Jackie recently, we've actually provided the evidence also for that we've addressed this issue. So it's dealt with already. But just to explain, IR35 is a concern that people who are freelancers could actually, in reality, be employees and should be treated as employees, and all the attendant bits and pieces in connection with that. The 3 freelancers in question, they've all been assessed using the HMRC tool to figure out whether they are subject to IR35. Only one of the 3 has a limited company who they invoice through, so only one of the 3 could have been deemed to be under IR35, and we've used HMRC tool and they are not, so there is no risk associated with that. They are all genuine freelancers.
Okay, and Fiona Robertson, you indicated you wanted to come in as well.
Thanks, convener. I think, excuse me, Mr. Anderson's answered the question, but I think there was also a question about the number of direct reports to the Chief Executive.
Yeah.
Full of cold.
Me too.
So, Willie, I don't know if you want to take that.
Yeah. Okay. So, as you will know, Fiona, one of the things that we've sought to do since Nick came on board, the Chief Executive, was to reduce the number of direct reports he inherited, which was certainly well into double figures. At the moment, we're down to, let me count this up, 7 direct reports, I would say, assessed with 3 freelancers and 4 staff members.
Okay, you're happy with these answers, Councillor McDade?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. It's good to hear reassurance that they have been assessed against IR35, and that the number of direct reports, because I do recall that being an issue that had come out of the earlier problems. So it's good to hear that is on the way down.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we seem to have a rotation of questions now, and Councillor Lane followed by Councillor Barrett again.
Thanks, convener. And I don't know if this question fits exactly on the Glasgow audit report, which I think was damning. I'm not an expert in audit, but to me it seemed to be a damning report on Horsecross and the practices within it back in 2019. Being convener's scrutiny in the interim period, we had Horsecross visit and scrutiny on numerous occasions and were assured that things were being dealt with, when obviously they weren't. I was just wondering, back in 2013, sat through this as well. My confidence of moving forward, I know it's a new board, it was a new board back then, is how do we monitor it and audit it moving forward? Because where was the audit and monitoring between 2013 and this damning report in 2019?
Okay, Jackie, are you able to give a response to that?
I think Fiona would be the best person to answer that question.
Okay, thanks. Fiona?
Thanks, convener, and thanks, Councillor Lang, for the question. I think to answer the first part of your question, 2019 is 2 years ago now. There were some very significant issues in Horsecross at that time that we uncovered. It's not a step we took lightly to commission Glasgow Audit to come in and have a look at Horsecross. A lot has changed. And I, as a senior monitoring officer for Horsecross, I'm satisfied that reasonable progress across the board is being made on these areas that were formerly of very significant concern. In terms of what happened between 2013 to 2019, Councillor Lang, I'm happy to talk to you about that offline in more detail, taking into account time, and the scope of this morning's agenda item is the Glasgow audit report. As Jackie has said, the report is not an audit of Horsecross per se, but as you are aware from your previous role in scrutiny, we do have a very clear framework for monitoring all three of our ALIOs in place. So we have detailed contract monitoring arrangements which look at what's being delivered operationally. We have a strategic relationship through the SLA, the contract for services, and we have scrutiny, which is exercised by elected members through, of course, scrutiny committee. Now, Horsecross has had systemic problems over a long period of time. They were never going to be fixed overnight, in my view. I've worked with Horsecross for coming up to 10 years now. But we are satisfied as officers, I think Jackie would echo this, that we are now on the right track with the organisation. There's a good, strong senior management team in place, and we look to Willie and to Nick and the new chair of the board, Colin Hood, to maintain the progress that has been made. Progress, I would add, during a pretty difficult period. Willie started, I think, just after the pandemic. And quite a lot of the audit controls and financial controls which need to be implemented in Horsecross, and Horsecross is not perfect yet. I guess no organisation is perfect, but a lot of those measures really do require senior managers to be in offices working with staff, particularly with middle managers who are budget holders, budget controllers, and having that face-to-face contact to make sure they understand their financial accountability. And it's not been possible for Willie and Nick Williams to do that consistently over the last 18 months for reasons that we all understand. So I hope that gives you a little bit more assurance, Councillor Lang, but happy to speak offline further if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm happy to accept that things will be moving forward in the way that we would want them, but we're not. In the last report, we couldn't give assurances or bring a report because of COVID and how it affected business. And here we're saying that we can do it in some parts in this report. So I don't know the difference between how we can give that assurance when we've not seen them in action totally. But I'm happy to speak to you offline, because I think members, residents of Perth and Kinross would want to know what happened in the period between 2016 and 2019 as well.
If I might just jump in as well, I note in the report that at 3.1 that the scope of this review is restricted to examining progress in implementing improvement areas highlighted by Audit Glasgow in December 2019. But I wonder why that is the case. If we're looking to learn lessons from what went wrong prior to 2019, should we not also have been looking backwards further in that regard as well?
If I may come back on that, Convener and Councillor Lang, and I think Jackie will probably want to add to this as well. Horsecross, in common with the other two ALIOs, has been the subject of internal audits in the past. It's not that nothing has happened in terms of audit activity and scrutiny between 2013 and 2019. And Horsecross has also been looked at over the last decade as part of thematic reviews carried out by Audit Scotland. So it's not that there has been no audit activity. As I said, the problems with Horsecross over the past 10 years, in my view, have been systemic, and they've been and like these problems often are, multiply layered, if you like. the redevelopment of the theatre, the departure of several chief executives, the departure of previous board members, all of these have been contributory factors. You asked if progress will be maintained and if Horsecross is home and dry yet. No, it's not home and dry yet. That's why Jackie's assessment is as it is in the report. But it would not be accurate to say that there has been no audit examination of the issues in Horsecross prior to 2019. And perhaps it would be helpful if we circulated a summary note just setting out that activity to committee members, convener, with your permission after this meeting, to give members a little bit more background and a bit more assurance on the activity that has gone on over the past 10 years.
Yeah, well, certainly. I mean, I have to say, I am aware from previous discussions that that there was internal audit activity in that 6-year period. But I guess what I'm personally keen to understand better is the level of routine oversight by council officers of Horsecross and why the danger signs weren't picked up sooner. And that's what I would like to get better clarity on myself. But let's see where other questions take us at the moment. Councillor Barrett, I think you were next.
Thank you, convener. I would like to say that having also received the reports that have come to scrutiny committee over the last year, where we assuredly continue to be a critical friend to Horsecross and the other ALIOs, I do note that very considerable progress seems to have been made after the really shocking situation that was uncovered in 2019. And I very much appreciate the work that's been done by the team, including Willie and Nick and Colin, in addressing this. And I appreciate what Fiona says, that it's not over yet. And my question is to Fiona regarding the action point 4 on page 26 of the papers, which relates to 3.19 of the Glasgow Audit Report. And just could she please give us a verbal update on the progress being made regarding the issues that weren't part of the Glasgow Audit Report, because I think because they weren't actually financial management or not directly within the scope. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett, sorry, which point in the report? I didn't catch what you said.
Sorry, it's really the 6 points in 3.19 of the Glasgow Audit Report on page 6 of the report, and it's referred to in page 26 of our papers for the committee. It's action point 4.
I think that's probably a question to Mr. Anderson, actually, Liz, rather than to Councillor Barrett, sorry, rather than to me. But I think suffice to say that when we commissioned Glasgow Audit to come in, there were a number of areas which are flagged in the report which were at that stage urgent priorities, and those have been the areas of our focus in terms of our work with Horsecross. These other 6 areas were areas that we knew that, given that the new chief executive was at this stage just in the door, and the Audit Glasgow report was published, I think, 2 weeks after Nick Williams arrived in post. They were things that we knew he would need to be able to address over a longer period of time. So they are still important, but they were not viewed by us as council officers as urgent at that stage. But Willie, do you want to just give an overview of progress and intent as well in terms of these other 6 action points?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. As you say, our interaction with yourselves and Jackie and other council officers has been based on the main action items, and really only in the last few weeks have we been asked to really think in detail about reporting on these things. And what I would say is that, on a personal level, I've have no issue with where we are with all of these things. They've all moved on hugely, and I think now that we've been asked again to formally bring them forward and evidence where we are, we'll do that within the time frame mentioned in the report. But I know it may sound a bit glib, but I have no issues. All of these things to me and to Nick are just everyday part of sensible management, and we've been acting on them since day one. But like I say, because we've not been formally asked to report, that's not come forward, but we will do now within the time frame mentioned.
Thank you. I see that's March 2022.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. Thank you very much for that.
In reality, I think we'll do it well in advance of that, but yeah.
Well, that's why I thought with it being March 22, you should be kind of a bit underway. I do appreciate they were not the highest issues and problems facing you, but I did think there must be some progress happening already for you to meet that deadline. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I think we're back to Councillor McDade with another question.
Yes, thank you, Convener. If I may, can I follow up on Councillor Barrett's last question first of all, if that's possible?
Of course.
Thank you. Just to pick up on those 6 areas that Glasgow Audit weren't in their original brief, but they did pick up on appropriately, in my view. Some of them have been described as less, I think the words were less important perhaps, but at least a couple of them I would consider quite significant. I understand from Mr. Anderson's answer that he does consider these as day-to-day good management, and I would agree with that. But I think that given the state of the organisation when the new chief executive and the new board came in, I think some of these would be considered high priorities as well, in addition to the other ones. The ones that particularly stand out to me were cyber security, which many people will be aware is a significant issue that is rising in most corporate settings and has the potential to essentially bring down an organisation. There are businesses in the private sector who have been held to ransom on this front. So if you could perhaps just give us a slight bit more detail. I appreciate you said that he will be reporting on this in future, but this is 2.5 years since the Glasgow audit was undertaken. Can you perhaps give us an overview just on the cybersecurity one, specifically what has been implemented on that front, please?
I mean, forgive me, I am far from an IT expert, but we do have a senior level, a senior manager with responsibility for IT in the organisation, and we have very specific contracts and relationships with an external IT provider, Resource IT. I am assured as a layperson in this that we are as cyber secure as the vast majority of organisations out there. I'm given those assurances by my team who are designated with those responsibilities, and I can say that in the 19 months I've been there, we have had no cyber security alerts, concerns and so on. But obviously now that this has been flagged, we can provide a much more formal reassurance within the time frame mentioned in the report.
Thank you. And Fiona, did you want to come in as well?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I think only briefly to add, Councillor McDade, to your question. You're quite right, and both you and Councillor Barrett are quite right. What I said is that these actions were viewed in 2019 by council officers as important, but not the most urgent. And as Willie said, I mean, I think in terms of some of the issues around working culture, organisational culture, the role of the board in scrutinising and holding the executive team in Horsecross to account, an awful lot of progress has been made there. On the cyber security, Councillor McDade, you are quite right to highlight that. No organisation can be complacent about that. What I would say, however, is that the Glasgow audit did not uncover any specific issues or threats in relation to cybersecurity in Horsecross, based on what it found. But it is and will be a live issue for Horsecross, as is for the other two ALIOs and indeed for the council. But just to stress, these are important actions, but in 2019 they were not viewed as the most urgent actions. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Anderson and Mr. Robertson, for the answer. I think it is things like the organisational culture, absolutely, and the board effectiveness. I agree. These are things that will develop over time. I think in terms of the cybersecurity, these are things that 2.5 years ago will have raced on, and I'm just aware of within my own sphere a number of companies that have been held ransom, given the significant ticketing operation that relies on IT systems, etc. That would basically be fundamental to Horsecross. I think it would be helpful if we could have a bit of detailed reporting on that in the future, and this is reported on in the future. If I can ask my next question that I had, convener, I just want to probe a bit around the access to the ledger, which was something that came out of the prioritised actions, and that work was undertaken on this, and it has been tightened up. However, this is still classed as, I think, high as a risk rating, and the 5.5 details that there remains scope to improve access controls by making full use of secure access controls through the system. Can we get a bit of detail just around when we're talking about improving access controls? Are we talking about reducing the number of people who have access? Are we talking about actually just tightening the security of the system? Can we get a bit of detail just about what that action, when implemented, will look like?
Jackie?
Thank you for the question. This really relates to a comment I made in the introduction that since the report was finalised, Willie has been able to provide me with a lot more evidence regarding this particular action. It did relate to the full suite of controls in place within the system, and so, for example, I've now seen evidence of the multi-factor authentication in action within the system, which is now in place. And back at the Glasgow audit, that was not fully in place and throughout the organisation. So I've seen evidence of that in place, and also of the review of those people who have access to the ledger. So that has taken place, and that action, as far as I'm concerned now, has been completed by Horsecross. So there is and your comments regarding cybersecurity back in 2019, when this was raised, this was highlighted specifically as a result of the controls, the IT controls not being fully functional. Those are now in place, and so that should assist with some of the risks there. Obviously not all the cyber risks, but it's certainly the organisation is in a better place by having adopted the controls that are available through the system.
Thanks very much. You'll have to forgive me, I am only getting at some points every third word due to the connectivity issues I indicated earlier on, but thank you very much for reiterating your answer, Jackie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Xander. And Councillor Lane, I think you have further questions?
Yeah, thanks. And maybe because it's on the same part, page 26, I may have missed, because I missed a bit of the through connectivity part of the answer. So, but the 6 areas were outside the Glasgow audit scope, so I don't know how much depth they went into them or just picked them up, but it is highlighted as medium risk in the risk register. So I don't think we could just underestimate these issues if they're given a medium risk. But the question is really, have any of these outcomes of these areas been presented to the board of Horsecross yet, as is the expectation that they will be as they're looked into?
Willie, are you able to answer that?
Yeah, I'm just trying to assess as I look at the words which have and which haven't. Certainly, there's been, as Fiona mentioned earlier, an awful lot of specific work on governance, which by definition will have gone through board, and the board has talked a lot about board effectiveness and organisational culture. In terms of things like cash security, gifts, hospitality, and so on, and those are, as you can imagine, at a staff level, much lower in the hierarchy than some of the other stuff, so they probably haven't. But we, as I say, before we report back in March, if the committee feels that they want to see evidence of that, we can certainly run everything past the board. And again, just to reiterate, until very recently, we were not aware that there was an expectation of formal reporting on this. But as I say, informally, I can report that all of these areas have moved on hugely, and I personally have no issues with any of them, but I accept that you as a committee will want to see evidence that they've been going through our own governance.
Okay, thanks. Fiona, did you want to come in and say anything more?
Yes, thanks, Convener. I think the answer to the question, Councillor Leng, is also in point 4 of the Management Action Plan, which talks about these 6 areas which Glasgow Audit colleagues identified but didn't look at in detail. And there's an action on me as the Senior Monitoring Officer to ensure that the Horsecross executive team is taking action on these 6 areas and reporting progress as part of the cycle of business reporting to the board. And I will make sure that that happens. I think also just briefly to say, and just to remind the committee for its understanding in terms of how the relationship between the council and ALIOs work. Perth and Kinross Council cannot direct an ALIO. Okay, it cannot direct an ALIO. An ALIO is an independent charity. In this case, in Horsecross's case and our other 2 ALIOs, we are also the sole member of that charity, which does give us rights and responsibilities to intervene where there is significant failure. And that's what we did in the case of Horsecross in 2019 and also going further back in 2013. We can give advice, and sometimes we give very strong advice, as Mr. Anderson will probably confirm, but we cannot direct. And therefore the role of scrutiny committee, of this committee, and the quarterly monitoring of the contract are the key tools that the council has to ensure that we are following the public pound and getting best value from our ALIOs.
Thanks, Convener. Can I come back on that a little bit, because that was what I was quoting from, was from page 26 of 46, as I said, which is point 4. And I understand we cannot direct, but we do commission. We have an SLA. But the part says the head of culture and community service will ensure that Horsecross consider these areas as part of their cycle of business, and that they will, the expectation that they will be reported to Horsecross board. Well, that sounds like a direction. If you're going to ensure something's done, you've got to be able to direct somebody to do it, or you can't ensure anything.
So the answer to that question, Councillor Leng, is that we would expect, as part of our contract monitoring arrangements, that the Horsecross executive team will provide a quarterly report to the board, to its board, on progress against these actions. And actually, you know, to think about this just from a common sense perspective, that's something that Mr. Anderson, Nick Williams would want to do anyway. And I know that they want and intend to do anyway, because it's the right thing to do for the organisation to move it forward, not just because the council is requiring it. We can make requirements of our ALIOs, Councillor Leng, and we will specify those requirements, those special requirements, in the SLA when we see that there's a need to do so. And we've done that with Horsecross and indeed other ALIOs in the past. But when we cannot direct, what I mean by that is we cannot manage the organisation. we cannot instruct the board or the executive team and direct them operationally in a day-to-day manner. We can intervene in certain circumstances. This is one of those circumstances because of the issues that came to light in 2019 through Glasgow Audit colleagues' work.
Okay. I think I have another question from Councillor McDade.
Yes, just to follow up on the answer just given by Ms. Robertson. The direction, so we did take we did take control of sole member back in 2019 as indicated. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
All right, sorry, just everything's frozen on my end, that's fine. I also believe we alerted Horsecross and our other allios in March 2020 that we were considering redirecting their staff as part of the pandemic. So we have occasionally considered using our direction, and I understand that we shouldn't do that on a regular basis, and I agree with that. But what I want to understand is actually after we did dismiss the board and senior management in 2019, or they left, and it was a combination, I seem to recall. After that occurred in 2019, when did we stop exercising direct authority as the sole member, and when did Horsecross essentially fully resume control of its own affairs? How long was the period that we were in direct control for?
So there's several parts to the answer to your question, Councillor McDade. The first part is to say the council did not dismiss the board or senior Horsecross employees in 2019. Previous board members resigned. The previous chief executive had left actually for a promoted post elsewhere in Scotland in June 2019. So the council did not dismiss board members or Horsecross staff, just to be clear about that. In terms of when we step in as sole member to direct an alio, as you say, we do that very rarely. We, in fact, asked all three alios at the outset of the pandemic if it would be possible to use resources, including buildings, most obviously the Dewars Centre, which is a Live Active Leisure building, which we currently use to deliver the mass vaccination programme. We did not formally direct them, any of the alios actually, in that situation, Councillor McDade, because all three alio boards agreed and quite rightly offered any resource and support that they could to help the council in its emergency response to COVID, and we were and remain extremely grateful for that. Third part of the answer is Horsecross, how long was Horsecross being directed by the council? A very short period of time. As you may remember, we had to put an interim management team into Horsecross from August to December 2019, simply because there was no chief executive in place and the organisation was in significant financial difficulty. That was a very rare and unusual step. It was discussed with Oscar, the charities regulator at the time. At the point where Nick Williams arrived as chief executive and a new board was appointed in December 2019, the council stepped back.
You happy with these answers, Councillor McDade?
Sorry, yes, thank you for the answer. I seem to recall, and I don't remember the exact details of it, the then chair exchanging reply all emails, copied in elected members, and So I was under the impression that we had at least requested the chair's resignation at the time. Perhaps I am mistaken in that recollection.
I can't comment on that, Councillor McDade, because I'm not sure which email exchanges you're referring to.
Okay. Right. Okay. So, do we have any further questions before we move on to comments? No, we don't seem to have. Okay. Now, Councillor McCall, you've been waiting patiently through the questions. You have a comment to make.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, and also note to self, if you're going to skim through the papers just before a meeting, make sure you look at the A after 5.1 and don't put a comment in the wrong place. So yeah, thank you very much indeed, everybody. I think we've had a bit of a lively debate there, but there's a couple of comments I just kind of wanted to mention. I mean, I've been a councillor since coming up for 5 years. And I know that the issues of Horsecross have certainly been discussed at various different full council meetings or at budgetary reviews right the way through the last 5 years. So I don't think any of the issues that we were experiencing or had been experiencing back in 2019 should come as any major surprise to any elected member. I'm slightly concerned, as the discussion was at the time when I put my C in the box, that we would be looking at using officers' time to replay some of the issues or to investigate some of the issues of the past. We obviously have learned the lessons. We know what the lessons are. That has become very apparent with the reports that have come forward. Now's not the time to go and replay those or to review them, but it is to learn from them and to put in place, as we have done, the ways forward. And now it's time to move forward and actually make sure that the concerns and the issues don't happen again. And I think that's actually where we are. Now, it would be, I think, unfair to expect, considering the last 18 months of the pandemic and the reshuffle of staff, to see this done in such a timely manner that might be requested of the committee. We need to give officers the time to be able to put these into practice, to be able to make the changes and to make sure it moves forward. And I'd like to see, obviously, as reports come forward, our job is to make sure that that is done as timely as possible and as swiftly as possible, but just to give the officers the chance to put forward these recommendations and make them work. So it's always easy in life when you have no financial constraints and a myriad of staff to be able to look at every possible concern and make sure that everything has top priority. But none of us live in that world. We do not have an completely never-ending money box, and we do not have a plethora of staff just waiting to do what needs done. So I would really like to just say to the committee and to officers, one, I really appreciate the work that's been done. It can see that everything is moving forward, and now if we could just give a little bit of time to make sure that this is all done and monitored properly so that we can move forward in the right direction. And that was all I really wanted to comment on. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you for these comments, and now we have Councillor Lang. You have some comments.
Obviously, being a substitute in here, I'm kind of surprised to hear these comments from a member of the audit team. I think audit is an extremely important function, and I'm sure people paying their council tax and can contribute towards the funds of the council would absolutely want an audit team, and I know we have a strong audit team, and it's good that we're going to be augmenting it with another member of staff. I think that you've got to look at the way things have happened to learn lessons, and if you can't just shut the door on that, you know, we have to see what happened between 2013 and 2019 and how we as elected members were unaware of what was actually happening, because we have had to provide funding from our budget, which a lot comes from our residents, towards helping Horsecross. And if we don't look back at how these situations arose, then we don't learn anything. So I think it's quite pertinent to ask questions about where funding come in. And if audit members of the audit committee don't think that's a pertinent way to look at things, I'm surprised. I think that I'm happy to see the way Horsecross is moving forward, and I wish them all the best. they will expect us to be monitoring how the progress moves forward, and it will be good to see their board being strong and being given information for them to make judgment on as well, and have a strong board, and information to them is the key to success of any organisation. A board that challenges, as an audit committee will challenge, and the scrutiny committee will challenge. And I think that what I've seen of the new Horsecross team, they'll welcome that and move forward. But I do think we'll have to look at how we got to such a damning report in 2019 and all that came from it, and learn lessons from it. So thanks for all the questions we've had, all the responses we've had, and I think we've all learned something from it today. Thank you, Councillor Ling. Councillor McCall, you have a point of order?
Yes, sorry, Convener. I may have misunderstood Councillor Lane there at the beginning. There seemed to be reference to surprise that I would have any concerns or any issues over the strength or the ability of our audit team. I made no comment on that. I want to go on record to state that I think our audit team is exceptional. I think what they do is brilliant. I was asking the committee to give them time to put the findings of the Glasgow audit into place and to give them time to make that go forward. Not at any point did I make a comment on any abilities or strength or standard of any officer that has anything to do with this committee, and I would like to make that doubly clear.
I didn't make any comment about that at all, actually. No, I didn't take that either, Councillor McCall. I think it was more about the committee's oversight than the audit team. But your points are noted, nevertheless. Oops, I've just lost my place in the comments there. Bear with me. There's a point of clarification from Fiona.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I think just briefly to say, just in terms of the points that have been made about how much information committees and councillors have had on the situation in Horsecross in the past, there have been a number of confidential briefings to councillors and committees when that's been appropriate. Most recently, if I remember, but I would need to check this, December 2019, and at key points in the period between 2013 and 2019.
Noted. Councillor McDade.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I am slightly surprised by Councillor McCall's comments. In my view, the purpose of this committee is to provide scrutiny and challenge, to get assurance on behalf of the council that the services are being provided as appropriately. And certainly in my 4.5 years as a member of the audit committee, the Glasgow audit report is one of the most damning that I have seen in that time, if not the most damning that I have seen in that time. And it would not, I do not believe we would be discharging our functions responsibly or completely if we were not providing strong questioning. And I don't think any of the questions provided by Councillors Lane, Barrett or myself today have put officers in a challenged position in any respect. I think we've had very good answers to everything, and I have assurance now at the end of that questioning that the situation is under control, and that 2.5 years on we are in a much better place than we were when the report was issued. I think that from my point of view, as I have said, the paper has given a level of assurance. The questioning today has furthered that assurance by actually the fact that we've discovered that further action and work has been undertaken on this, and also has given officers a bit of a clearer direction as to where we might like to see some further reassurance in the future. So I think this has not been a waste of officers' time, far from it. I think it has been essentially the audit committee discharging its functions appropriately and fully, and I'm quite disappointed that a member of the committee thinks otherwise.
Okay, thank you, and Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Convener. I'd just like to point out that, as Willie and Fiona admitted, the situation isn't yet quite under control, but it is heading in the right direction. And again, I'd just like to repeat my thanks to everyone for the work that's going into sorting this out. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no further comments, so we're asked to note that the internal audit review wishes to place reasonable reliance on the overall control environment for implementing the agreed actions arising from the Audit Glasgow report, and that the agreed actions, once fully implemented, should enable internal audit to place substantial assurance on these arrangements. Are we agreed on that?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, moving on then to the final item on today's agenda, which is an internal audit report on all three services and the Health and Social Care Partnership in terms of contracting, and this is report 20-04 incorporating report 19-06. And again, Jackie, if I can ask you to speak to that report, please. You're on mute.
Apologies for that. Thank you, convener. As you've highlighted, this report covers findings from 2 consecutive audits, where the original one was not reported prior to the pandemic ceasing internal audit functions temporarily, and we felt that it was probably better to bring these two at the same time because the work was very similar. Procurement features highly on risk registers as far as ensuring that contracts are appropriately awarded, managed, and achieve the outcomes and obtain best value for the council whilst being legally compliant. And we've examined contracts for both the award and also the management, and that's covered within this report. Contracts are managed at individual contracts and service level. For in these individual contracts, any learning that has been fed back to services on an individual basis. This report it brings together issues which are a bit more sort of cross-service and affect the overall governance of contract award and management. Areas of good practice are highlighted in section 4, and this also this section also details the assessment of the control environment as being reasonable with the definitions provided in section 12. The action plan contains 6 actions, with a couple of them being broken down further to assign specific responsibilities to particular services, so that then we could, when it comes to following up these actions, it's clear if one service has completed and one service hasn't, as different services have different priorities in the event of delays occurring. It'll be clear to Audit Committee. The service contacts are here to answer any service-specific questions, and also Mr. Mackenzie is here as he has management of the procurement function. I'm happy to take any questions or comments on this report.
Thank you again, Jackie. I have a question myself, but I shall wait and see if colleagues ask the question for me, and if not, I'll come in at the end. Councillor Barrett, please, first.
Thank you, convener. Thank you for this report, Jackie. I note that in our discussion of the previous item, Willie Anderson and Fiona Robertson referred to the importance of the areas of management appended to the Audit Glasgow report, including the governance arrangements for the scheme of delegation and the authorised signatories. As someone with a background in procurement and contract management, I found this report quite shocking in that there was such a lack of documentation of authorised officers to sign contracts, no contract management no contract managers for the contracts audited in 2019-20, the lack of a control framework across services for contract management, lack of evidence of contract management training, lack of key performance indicators in contracts themselves and their management. I note that the risk ratings for each of the actions set out in the management action plan on from page 37 is medium, but I would ask whether the combination of these weaknesses in all these areas would indicate that there is actually a higher level of risk. And I do appreciate that you can't extrapolate, but from the 7 contracts that you reviewed, I found the situation really quite shocking, and also the level of assurance, whether that should be limited rather than I think it's reasonable at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Jackie, do you wish to respond?
Yes, thank you for that. I suppose what I would say from the start is that we have also made judgments based on the levels of the officers who have undertaken the various roles. So activity is taking place, although that, for example, the KPIs, nothing is captured within the documentation regarding what performance indicators were going to be assessed. The contract has been managed with a view to managing the appropriate outcomes or output depending on the contract. So activity has taken place at contract level, and that has probably influenced, it has influenced our understandings that activity is taking place. We've not got the governance in place as far as having the documentation in place. But there was an appropriate level of authorization, and all these things were appropriate that were in place. It's just that we haven't got the documentation to support that from a higher level in terms of the authorizations from the top down. But we did take we took an assessment of the appropriateness and of what would be in those documents. I don't know whether Stuart Mackenzie may want to add some more context with regard to procurement and procurement training.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you, Stuart, for your smiling face has appeared on screen, so no doubt you wish to comment.
Thank you, convener. I'm not sure many colleagues would describe me as having a smiling face. Thank you, Councillor Barrett, for your question. Yeah, I think we would recognise that the documentation lags behind the practice here. That would be my observation. If I can provide the committee of assurance that not only internal audit but our external audit have looked at our procurement practices and have not identified any issues. And actually, public sector procurement is one of the most regulated activities that the council undertakes. Our contracts are published on Public Contracts Scotland, and if members wish to have a look, they can see the outcome of that process. So there is a high degree of transparency and a fair amount of scrutiny around our procurement activity, but I would recognise that our documentation does lag behind practice. In terms of training, training has been undertaken by the corporate procurement team. A lot of that training material is online. We need to look at perhaps refreshing our practice in this area, and on the back of this audit, it's an activity, an area of activity that I'd like to have discussion with service colleagues around. I take Councillor Barrett's points around concerns around the lack of documentation. I think we certainly need to refresh the documentation, but in my opinion, that doesn't illustrate an underlying lack of control, and that is not the conclusion of the audit report and our internal audit team's findings.
Okay, thank you. Are you content with that, Councillor Barrett?
Yeah, I think the concern is I do understand the rules around procurement and the transparency, but I think the concern here is about the management of our contracts once they're in place, and I warmly welcome the actions that are there, many of which I see are landing on you, Stuart, to address the contract management issues and try to put in place a documented standard control framework which will save everybody reinventing wheels all over the place, and produce consistency and confidence that we are managing contracts better than perhaps we appear to be doing at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And now we have Councillor McDade.
Thank you. I missed some of the answer to Councillor Barrett's excellent questioning there, and I would fully endorse her theme there entirely. I found this one probably the most shocking paper we had this morning, in fact, and I agree that I was quite stunned, to be honest, at the lack of process we have for spending 248 million. And I appreciate a lot of this will just happen as good practice, but that actually the lack of documentation is very concerning, given you know, how bureaucratic an organisation the council is in general. I actually want to query a point around the management action plan. Councillor Barrett's already queried the risk rating, but actually I want to question the action owners. The actions are against the Executive Director of Communities, the Chief Operating Officer, the Chief Executive, and the HSCP's Chief Officer or Director. Only against the HSCP's Chief Officer or Director is the action owner actually the individual. In other ones, it is under is a head of service under that individual, and I'm a bit surprised by that, because I would have thought that the action, given it's for the Executive Director to actually set out who they feel the scheme should be, who should be authorised, that it should then actually sit, the action should sit with someone underneath them. So I'd just like to understand why that is sitting with someone at head of service level, as opposed to with the actual individual tasked with the responsibility.
Jackie, are you able to respond to that?
Yes, Convener, I am. The officers who have been identified will be the ones who are the primary contacts within service, who will be driving forward all actions in relation to this report, and as such they will be putting in place the arrangements which will then be endorsed ultimately by the executive directors. But nonetheless, you know, these officers are appropriate officers within the service to lead on them, and to actually put an appropriate framework in place, which would then be endorsed by the executive directors or the relevant chief officer.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that the officers that are listed as the action owners are likely to do a lot of the actual work around this action, but it was more the fact that the senior officer who should be setting out, and who, as you say, will sign this off, to me should be the person that's held accountable for ensuring that that action is actually actioned. I appreciate others will, you know, carry out the work on it potentially, but I just felt that it perhaps should sit. And I would also like to say that I think the executive director of ECS should be, you know, congratulated on having, you know, ensured that this is in place. But I find it a bit odd that it essentially sitting with. I appreciate these people will do the contract work and etc. But I just thought it was a bit odd not to sit with the senior officer whose responsibility it is.
Okay, thank you for your observations, Councillor McDade. Councillor Illingworth, you're next.
Thank you, Convener. Questions fairly short, I hope. Internal Audit selected 7 contracts. There must be hundreds of contracts with PKC. And how did you select those 7 contracts?
Partially, it was based on the risk of the delivery of the outcomes. Partially, it was on finances. Certainly, going back to the 2019, I can't actually recall the detailed rationale between contracts that we did select, but we also wanted to have a look at contracts that crossed services as well, so that there was a wide range of contracts covering a wide range of spend and a wide range of services and officers, to see if there was any consistency. And I think that Councillor Barrett mentioning the word consistency earlier, and that is really what the actions are looking for, is a consistent approach across the council.
Right, okay, thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lane.
Thank you. And unlike Councillor Barrett, was having no experience of procurement, I'll just ask this as obviously as a layman. So if there are no key performance indicators documented, how can either council officers at various levels or the providers of the service to the council monitor the performance of the contract? If it was documented, then anybody could ask to see it, and they would be able to see if it was being delivered to that agreed position. So how do the various officers manage to monitor the delivery of a contract if there are no performance indicators actually written down for them to call up and reference? And surely it should be a pretty much black and white area, but this, if there's nothing documented, it leaves it very grey. So we wouldn't know how well the service that we're procuring has been delivered.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie.
For the contracts that we examined, whilst the key performance indicators were not articulated, there was a clear framework for monitoring the delivery of these contracts, which provided evidence to internal audit that the contracts were being managed and delivering the outcomes or the outputs that were required. The documentation of the key performance indicators, as you've said, was not in place for the majority, and that is something which, had the contract not been delivering, would have been problematic. Which is why we can only really comment on the contracts that we did look at to say that it didn't cause an issue for the specific contracts, but it is something that as a council we need to tighten up on and make sure that we do get these things documented, so that in the event of there being issues with contracts, that we've got the evidence in place for what we required, what our performance standards were, and how we and if there's any remedial action that needed to be taken. With the contracts that we looked at, there was no requirement for that.
Thanks. Convener, could just go back. It wasn't just a majority. I wish I had a majority like that in any election. I was 85% of the contracts looked at had no KPIs in place, which is it's overwhelming, I would say, rather than just a majority. So.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And Jackie, if I may just come in with my question, which is related to this this issue as well. So if I read your conclusion correctly, what you're saying there is that you're able to place reasonable assurance on the overall control environment for awarding of contracts, but then you go on to say that effectively, because of this deficiency in terms of monitoring of KPIs, that you're not able to offer any assurance on that issue. Is that what you're saying or not?
Not at all. The contract specifications would specify what was required to be delivered, so that would still be in place, and that is what was being monitored against. There weren't individual. That wasn't broken down any further into the key performance indicators, but the contract specification was there, and that was what was being monitored against.
Thank you. Lisa, did you want to come in further?
Yeah, I think it's really just picking up. I think the point that Stuart McKenzie made earlier about the practice perhaps lagging behind some of the paperwork. And I'm not minimising any of the actions that have been identified, and absolutely in terms of tightening up governance, etc. And for the sake of transparency in looking at these matters, it's definitely an action that we will take on board and we will look to improve. I think it's very important, however, that the committee and the public are aware that there isn't slack contract practice going on. I mean, this is tested annually by our annual governance statement process, by internal audit, by external audit. It's a high spend and high risk area which is scrutinised in some depth and continually monitored throughout the year. There's not a lack of practice or process. Our process is prescribed, as Councillor Barrett will know in particular, by primary and secondary legislation. And in terms of a council's activity, we are probably the most stringently regulated as a public body in terms of our spend and our obligations in terms of following the public pound. So the other bit about scheme of delegation and authorised signatories, we've not got a situation whereby people randomly can just sign contracts. That's not the way it works. I mean, in terms of executive directors who are specifically nominated, there is a provision for them to delegate that, and they have delegated that to senior levels of staff within the organisation, namely chief officers like myself or me in my capacity as head of legal and governance, etc., to be able to sign contracts, and that is practice that's well known and well understood. The deficiency is that we've not actually put together a piece of paper and published that piece of paper that says, on behalf of the Chief Executive or Karen Donaldson as Chief Operating Officer or the Executive Director of Communities, the following posts are allowed to. But that is very highly regulated. You know, random people can't just sign contracts. So I would like to stress that it's not that there is no process and control and governance around this important area and this significant spend. There is, but there are definitely some areas of improved housekeeping around that in terms of transparency and evidencing that for the purpose of external scrutiny. And these points will be tightened, and we will look at that as an opportunity to see if there are even other areas that have not been highlighted that we can improve. But please don't sit there as an audit committee thinking that there is no control around this significant spend. There absolutely is, and that is scrutinised and tested regularly and has found to be robust.
No, thank you for these comments, and that was kind of behind my question. I just wanted to tease that out because anybody and Councillor Barrett's initial comments about the shockingness, if that was the word she used, of the report. I think we needed to have that set out and explained in layman's language, if you like. So thank you for that. And Mr. Mackenzie, did you have something to add?
Thank you, Convener. I'm not as eloquent as my colleague, Mrs. Simpson, but I was just going to make it very
possible to be as eloquent.
I think any of us would struggle to be as eloquent as Mrs. Simpson. The point I was going to make was that if we do have controls clearly through our financial systems around you can incur expenditure. If we didn't, this committee has for a number of years received reports from our external auditors. I can absolutely assure you that would be right at the top of our red flags if we did not have that control environment, and our control environment around that expenditure is robust, as the committee will know from the audit reports they have had from our external auditors, KPMG. We have a point about the engagement with contractors and KPIs. Clearly there's two distinct things, isn't there? There's purchasing goods, where we will simply know when we receive the goods whether we've received what we've bought or not, and that's a fairly yes/no statement. In terms of services, relationships are more ongoing, and perhaps that is where the performance information would be more helpful. However, I would reassure the committee that in terms of the management of service contracts, it's not simply a case that we let a contract and there's no further engagement with the contractor. That engagement will vary depending on the contract, but there's, depending on what the contract is, continuous engagement with the contractor over service delivery. So if you take something like our public transport contracts, there perhaps will be weekly, if not daily, contact with the contractors who are providing that service. If you take our insurance contract, which I'm responsible for, we have daily interaction with our insurer. So there is an ongoing dialogue over service delivery with our contractors in terms of the supply of services. But that will vary depending on the contract.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barrett, you had a further question?
Yes, thank you, Convener. I was looking at the scope and limitations of this review on page 32, 3.2. This is only for contracts arranged and administered by collaborative partnerships and commissioned services, and is limited to those carried out by PKC officers for the running of contracts within PKC. I'm just wondering, out of the 250 million a year of contracts, what about other contracts which aren't actually being run within PKC? Can you give us an indication of the scope of that and what assurance we have about the management of these, please?
Who would like to answer that one?
At this point, I wouldn't be able to give a massive amount of detail on this, but I will get back to the committee on that.
Thank you. I just wonder if we need comfort regarding that aspect of our contract management as well, but that would be helpful. Thank you, Jackie.
Okay, thanks. Are there any further questions? Don't appear to be. Do we have any comments in conclusion? If not, can we agree to note the report and the assurances offered by the Head of Internal Audit?
Agreed.
Okay. Councillor Lane, you have a comment. Sorry, just come in.
Sorry, it was just a comment that I welcome the report, and I'm glad that a lot of these things have been picked up. It was 0.5.16, contract managers selected for testing and not attended training recently, and internal audit were informed by them that they were experienced contract managers, and this assurance was accepted. I would like to think that we maybe do update training, because things are moving on in every part of life, and that's just a comment that the audit may want to look at in the future, to just accept that people are experienced. Things change all the time. You could be 50 years in a job or 40 years in a job, and things have changed the way business is done. So I would like to think that maybe something along that line would be training, maybe not mandatory, but people would undertake it.
Okay, thank you for these comments. If there are no further comments, therefore, can we agree to note the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, so that concludes the business for this meeting, and thank you to everyone for their robust and detailed questioning, and for the answers received as well in support of these papers. So that concludes the business for today, and it only remains for me to wish everybody a happy, and in particular a safe Christmas and New Year period. I note that further restrictions may be announced by UK government this afternoon as well, so please do, everybody, stay safe and have a good Christmas and New Year.